wrong. And if he was an anti-realist, which he actually was, he could say, I'm just not against it because it isn't an example of anything else that I'm against. Right? There's nothing wrong with it, he'd say. But by that, he'd just be expressing his attitudes instead of beliefs. Yeah, Patty?
Just to go over the four things, or like these are logic, analogy, and personality, two separate ones?
No, that's another one.
Okay,
it's got two parts, like the first one's had many parts.
Okay,
the fourth one was the one about looking for the deeper grounding.
Okay.
Searching for more fundamental principles. So in all these cases, what you do if you're arguing with an anti-realist is you reason just like Socrates does. Try to find out what the person values, and then you go from there. Right? I may not be able to tell you that your values are wrong if anti-realism is true. But I can get you to stop valuing certain stuff if you're normal by making arguments of these sorts. Analogy, non-moral factual arguments, etc. Make sense? And if realism is true, there's nothing else you can do anyway. Realism is true, that's all you can do anyway. You could pound the table and say, damn it, homosexuality just is wrong. But then you've stopped reasoning, you're just table thumping. That's not reasoning to somebody. So my contention would be that the anti-realist has the same tools available to her that the realist has available to her. The moral argument. So, although I'm really interested in the question of whether moral realism is true or not, and have a strong view on it, as a practical matter, I don't think it matters. When we start talking about abortion, nobody had to say, well, there was never a point where it would have been appropriate for one of you to say, well, that's just because you're a moral realist, Don, or because you're an anti-realist, Don. Nothing I said hinged on it. And people in the class who are anti-realists can think of it as helping them figure out what values to hold, and the people who are moral realists can think about trying to figure out what the moral truth is. Doesn't matter. Yep.
After that, you say, does the realist have any other views? When you say explain in all cases, what would you explain?
I just mean whenever you make a claim like that, like these, I want you to explain it.
Like the like the.
If you just say, here are the tools.
You want us to go through and explain them, like how each would do this?
Yeah, and use the examples to explain it. That's right. It's just a way of saying anytime you make a statement in philosophy, a philosophy exam, you ought to be explaining. And so just to make sure I haven't left any, explain this out. You know, it's the phrase explain this out to say, in all cases, explain. Explain your claims, don't just state them. Yep.
So, what about the two doctrines that are using moral relativism?
Good. Moral relativism is the view that there's a moral truth, but it's relative to something. To a culture, to each individual, to a time, right? To a nation, to something. So the moral truth, the temporal moral relativist would say that the moral truth now is not the same as the moral truth 100 years ago. Right? That's a kind of moral relativism. The geographic one might say that the moral truth here is not the same as the moral truth in Saudi Arabia. Here, this is actually one of the qualifiers for realism that I'm not sure I mentioned. One of the ways in which you can be complex. It might be that certain non-moral factors affect how morality is applied, how moral truths or moral principles are applied. So if the moral rule says something like, it's wrong to gratuitously inflict offense on people, gratuitously offend people, right? Giving somebody food with your right hand doesn't offend people around here by and large. In South India, it would offend people a lot. It would be like saying eat shit for them, to give them food with the right hand. So, if there's a moral truth of the matter, it's wrong to give people food with your right hand in South India, but not wrong to do it here. Does that mean that moral relativism is true? No. Because the moral truth here is that it's wrong to gratuitously offend somebody, and different things happen to offend different people in different places. That's not relativism. That's just morality being dependent upon certain non-moral states of affairs. Just like if I say the moral truth is you should cause as much pleasure and prevent as much suffering as possible. We still need to find out what causes pleasure and what causes suffering. Some kids, you tickle them, it doesn't bother them. They like it. Other kids, you tickle them, and it's clear that you're torturing them. Right? And you know people who tickle children when they shouldn't be tickling them. Right? Because they're really hurting the kid, causing the kid suffering. Right? Does that mean that there's no moral truth? It might be that the moral truth is just it's okay to tickle kids who doesn't bother, or kids who like it. It's not okay to tickle kids who don't like it. It's okay to kick your horse when you're riding a horse because it's got so much muscle there and it doesn't hurt the horse like it would hurt me if you kicked me right here, in the ass. Right? Or even worse, right here. I don't have a lot of muscle there. It's my ribs, So that's not relativism. Okay, moral relativism is that morality, there is moral truth, but it's relative to time, place, person, etc. Okay? What about the doctors that are confused with it? Well, everybody believes that, that if there's a moral truth, that whether or not there's a moral truth, moral beliefs differ from place to place and time to time. Right? That's just true. And so that's the diversity of moral opinions or something like that. So some people think abortion's never okay. Some people think it's okay in lots and lots of circumstances. That's a difference. But it doesn't establish that moral relativism is true. Because it could be that one side is right and the other side is wrong. Or they're both wrong. Not that they're both right, as moral relativism would say. Some versions would say, right? So just by analogy, some people think the world is flat, other people think the world is round. The shape of the earth relativist would say that the earth's shape depends on what people believe about it. So it's round in places where people think it's round, but it's flat in places where people think it's flat. That's a crazy view. And the analogous view in morality is not a requirement just because we find diversity of moral opinions. Some people could be wrong. That doesn't mean, the people who are right are always the colonizing nations, and the people who are wrong are always the colonized. Or that, people in America are right and people everywhere else in the world are wrong. That's just stupid, right? It means that there might still be a moral truth. Or there might be no moral truth, in which case nobody's right. Moral relativism says in a way that everybody's right. Every culture is right, every time is right, or every individual is right, depending on which form of moral relativism you take. So the diversity of moral opinions isn't the same as moral relativism, and relativism doesn't follow from it. The second one you might confuse with it is a principle of toleration that says that it's wrong to impose our values on others, either by force or even just by making judgments. So who are we to say that it's wrong for people in certain parts of the world to perform clitorectomies on 12-year-old girls? Somebody might say, right? It's wrong for us to impose our values even by judging that to be wrong. We shouldn't even think that thought. Okay? That principle of toleration doesn't make a lot of sense to me, actually. In addition, it doesn't follow from moral relativism. If morality is relative to, say, culture, that doesn't mean that we should live and let live. If the truth about morality is relative to culture, then whether it's okay to impose our values on others depends on what your culture thinks about imposing your values on others. If you come from an intolerant culture, then intolerance is correct according to moral relativism. If that sounds implausible, tell it to the relativist, not to me. I'm not a relativist. I don't think the view makes any sense.
Did you say
That it's wrong to impose your values on others, either by force or by passing judgment. So when Mary Midgley talks about, what does she call it? What's the term Mary Midgley uses? I'm forgetting it now. Yeah. Mary Midgley's paper is all about this principle. I'm just blanking on the name of it. It's probably the medication on it. But the principle says something like this: you shouldn't make judgments about other cultures. Wrong to make judgments about other cultures. That's a form of toleration principle. And she's making fun of it when she talks about on Venus and stuff like that. her name for it isn't one that's used in philosophy. It's just idiosyncratic to her. It's a version of, it's not a coherence principle of toleration. Okay. What else? Yep.
If you say that relativism
So I just did that. The answer is no in each case.
Okay.
You could believe in toleration without believing that moral relativism is true. If you believe in relativism, toleration doesn't follow, right? And the diversity of moral opinions does not establish that moral relativism is true.
Okay.
It's consistent with realism, anti-realism, or relativism.
So there's nothing right about that.
About what?
Is that, I'm sorry.
None of them follows from any other.
Oh, okay. I'm just like a little bit. So then you also asked what you get
About the two other principles?
I'm just,
Is that what I said?
well, because
Just read the sentence that you're asking about, because I'm not sure what part you're talking about.
explain why we're not and explain what's right and wrong about each of these doctrines. I'm
Yeah.
just confused because, like, I don't know. I think I'm doing something weird.
Well, let me just help you there, because I can tell you what's right and wrong about them. At least I can give you a start. The principle of diversity of moral opinions, or whatever you want to call it, is just true. Anthropologists have shown us that people have had very, very different moral views, in different times and places. And even you could just look around you and see that there is a diversity of moral opinions, right? So I gave you a little piece from Herodotus, in which he talks about all these weird customs that he's found in other cultures. He's just amazed by that. But moral relativism doesn't follow from that. Okay? So although it's true that there's a diversity of moral opinions, that doesn't mean that moral relativism is true. How much diversity there is, we don't know exactly, and I'm not asking you to get that detail. What about toleration? Well, toleration, I mean, if you want to reason with me about whether to tolerate others or not, what I would say is that it's often a good idea to tolerate, to not interfere, because interference has costs, right? So we went into Iraq thinking we could make the situation better for the Iraqi people, and we killed an awful lot of Iraqi people in doing that, right? And the government that we set up there may not have been so beneficial to the Iraqi people. Should we have gone in? I don't know, but we didn't consider the cost very carefully. That was a mistake. So, do I think that we should be fairly tolerant? Yeah. We better figure out what's going on with the culture. We've got to be smart about it before we try to interfere. And likewise, before you pass judgment. You know, if you say, you know, oh, keeping kosher is just so stupid. Those people think that it's okay, you know, that they shouldn't eat pork. But pork is perfectly good for you. But why do they have that prohibition? Just being stupid. Well, you might want to know that the prohibition isn't based in concerns about your health. That's not what it's about. So knowing that would help you to make a more sensible judgment. So do I think that we ought to hold back on passing judgment and be more careful about it? Sure. Do I think we ought to hold back on interfering? Sure, because interference has real costs. But sometimes you have to, or sometimes it's okay to. The principle of toleration would say, oh, they're just Nazis killing, you know, lots and lots of their people and people in other countries that they've taken over. Live and let live. If that's what they want to do, let them do it. That overlooks their victims, right? So we also had an intervention in Bosnia, where forces that were aligned with Serbia were going around and raping Muslim women as part of their policy, right, was to rape women, to terrorize people, and killing lots and lots of people. And we went and bombed the shit out of them, and it took about a week, and things got a lot better for a lot of people. It was probably a good thing to do. Happened under Clinton. Probably the right thing to do.